Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. Let's begin today's video with several deeply concerning stories on China's ongoing housing crisis. Yesterday, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin published a very long cover story called Rethinking China's Property Market Meltdown. It's a sobering read, and in a rarity for domestic Chinese media, it doesn't pull punches either, expressing, quote, "The downward spiral of China's ailing property sector shows no sign of abating despite the government's rollout of a seemingly endless series of supportive but, as of yet, ineffective measures, with the crisis stretching for over 3 years. Risks in the real estate industry have started spreading from private firms to companies with mixed ownership, with the contagion now poised to reach state-owned builders if the weak market condition persists. The risk appetite at financial institutions is expected to further decrease, which will in turn worsen the financial woes of developers." End quote. In a November 3rd report, ratings agency Moody's said that the weakening industry fundamentals are expected to continue to drag down the credit quality of rated developers over the next 12 to 18 months. Li Yujia, Chief Housing Policy Analyst at Guangdong Urban and Rural Planning and Design Institute, expressed this week, quote, "The real estate market's decline has exceeded expectations. And even with strong administrative and financial relief policies, it remains challenging to stimulate a market recovery." End quote. In response to this observation, Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis expressed today, quote, "It might have exceeded expectations, but only because analysts and policymakers have underestimated the extent to which 30 years of soaring real estate prices would inevitably embed real estate leverage into every part of the economy. The developers themselves, along with their suppliers, of course, but also other businesses, households, and above all, financial institutions and local governments." End quote. He adds that property prices in China are still very high relative to income, and so even without the huge number of empty apartments in the system, quote, "I would be surprised if we didn't see continued contraction in the sector. If I am right, there is no point in trying to revive the market. Instead, Beijing should allow it to continue to contract and focus instead on addressing financial distress impacts associated with its contraction that may become self-reinforcing." End quote. However, policymakers evidently are not heeding that advice. Over the weekend, Chinese regulators met with major banks to direct them to ease financing for developers. During the meeting, reported on by several outlets, domestic and international, banks were told to keep their real estate loan growth at a level no lower than the banking sector's average real estate loan growth. Loan growth to non-state-owned developers no lower than each bank's real estate loan growth, and mortgage growth to individuals buying housing from non-state-owned developers to no lower than each bank's mortgage growth. Put simply, keep the money flowing to housing, even if it doesn't make business sense. Meanwhile, US outlet Bloomberg reports, citing unnamed sources, that Beijing has drafted a list of 50 property firms eligible for funding, that is, massive bailouts. China Wanke Co., Caixin Group Limited, and Longfor Group Holdings Limited are among companies that have been named in a draft of the so-called White List. China Wanke is a player to keep an eye on especially. It has been one of the best-performing developers with strong state backing and had been one of China's few remaining investment-grade builders. However, this all changed in October when Wanke's onshore and offshore bonds plunged. Wanke securities in a Bloomberg index of Asia investment-grade dollar notes lost 35% for all of October. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai writes this week that, quote, "Wanke's towering position in the sector as the country's second-largest builder by contracted sales means it holds systemic and symbolic significance. And if it were to become embroiled in a debt crisis, it would further undermine market confidence." End quote. Next up, another twist in Taiwan's presidential elections. Hey everyone, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is also a big help. And for anyone who wants to help me keep this channel financially sustainable, my hope is also eventually to do this as my full-time job so I can put more time into it and hire a team to expand what the channel covers. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. The channel relies primarily on subscriber support, so this is a huge help for me and the channel going forward. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Next up, the deal for a joint ticket between Taiwan's KMT and TPP parties, widely recognized as the best bet for defeating the DPP's William Lai in the upcoming Taiwanese presidential election, a development which we covered last week, may have already collapsed after only a few days. It's reported that talks have broken down as the two camps cannot agree on a formula to determine whether the KMT's Hou Youyi or TPP founder Ke Wen-je is the stronger candidate to head the campaign. Nathan Bato, an election expert at Academia Sinica in Taipei, told UK-based The Financial Times, quote, "It looks to me like we are headed for a breakdown." End quote. A decision must be made by this Friday, so we will need to follow the space closely. Meanwhile, yesterday, Monday, presidential frontrunner, the DPP's William Lai, named Taipei's former envoy to the United States, Xiao Meiqin, as his running mate in January's election. Xiao has extensive connections in Washington and is despised by Beijing, who has labeled her a separatist. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed with the news, quote, "William Lai's naming of Xiao Meiqin as his running mate should help his campaign and will make Beijing even more wary of his possible election, as Xiao, in her role as the de facto Taiwan ambassador to the US, has been very effective in courting many important constituencies in DC. Lai posted this photo of him and Xiao on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to his Facebook page when making the announcement. Beijing will not appreciate the symbolism." End quote. With the presidential election just a few months away in mid-January, it may be worth quickly familiarizing ourselves with the political landscape. From the outside, it can be tempting to overemphasize the importance of cross-strait relations and mainland China policy as a concern for voters. And while certainly relevant, there are other prominent concerns in the minds of many voters, including stagnant wages, a sluggish economy, a shortage of affordable housing for younger people especially, immigration, energy security, and defense policy. This will put pressure on the current ruling party, the DPP. The DPP is a socially left-wing party and centre-left on the economy. In April this year, the DPP nominated current Vice President William Lai as its candidate for president. He is currently leading the polls, but not by a majority. Facing slow economic growth, Lai's campaign has advocated diversification of business and trade links away from China and improving Taiwan's economy through expanded social welfare benefits. On foreign policy, Lai is very pro-American, and while he has used strong pro-independence language in the past, since entering elite politics, he has moderated his cross-straits policy position to a pro-status quo one. On defense, Lai has called for strengthening alliances and improving Taiwan's own military. Beijing has condemned Lai as a separatist. The KMT is the most important party in the Pan-Blue coalition and the main opponent of the DPP. US-based The Asia Society writes this week, quote, "Ideologically, the party champions unification with China, but it has been forced to dilute this position in the face of declining support. The KMT now favors maintaining the status quo, while at the same time pursuing peaceful relations with the PRC." End quote. The KMT has nominated Hou Youyi as their presidential candidate, who has attacked the DPP as being reckless in regards to cross-strait relations, risking war. Hou's economic platform largely promotes Taiwan's external economic relations, especially with mainland China, and supporting export-led growth. Beijing's ideal outcome would be a KMT-led government. Taiwan's third biggest political party is the relatively young Taiwan People's Party, founded in 2019 by Ke Wen-je, who is also running for president now. As the new kid on the block, the TPP has adopted a strategy of presenting itself as an outsider to the traditional two parties, and as such has won support among young people disillusioned with traditional politics. Asia Society also observes, quote, "Younger generations of Taiwanese have weaker ties to traditional ideological affiliations than their parents and grandparents, who lived through the early phases of open conflict between the oppressive KMT regime and the main opposition forces as the country began liberalizing and democratizing in the 1980s and 1990s." End quote. The TPP promotes trade liberalization and favors trade diversification to reduce dependency on China. Currently, 40% of Taiwanese exports go to the mainland market. The TPP has the most muscular defense policy, wishing to increase Taiwan's defense budget to 3% of GDP, higher than the record 2.5% reached in the 2024 budget proposal. Party leader Ke Wen-je has a bit of an image issue, however, coming across to some as an elitist and pompous intellectual, frequently referring to his IQ score and name-dropping the prestigious university he went to, as well as attacking others for studying at what are considered lower-level universities. There is a final wildcard too. At the end of August 2023, Foxconn founder Terry Gou, Guo Taiming to use his Chinese name, announced his candidacy as an independent, a move which some have called a vanity project, which could pull voters away from the KMT. Gou, or Guo, has promised that if he is elected president, he will make Taiwan's per capita GDP the highest in Asia. He is currently polling as the fourth of the four candidates. How will Beijing seek to influence this upcoming election? Quote, "Any action on the part of the CCP that could be deemed as intimidation toward the Taiwanese is likely to push voters in the direction that ultimately displeases Beijing. The PRC seems to have learned its lesson, and rather than trying to install fear in the Taiwanese people, it is pursuing a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, it is continuing to employ grey zone tactics, such as conducting digital warfare or sending ships and airplanes toward Taiwan, well beyond the median line to show its might. On the other hand, in September 2023, the CCP unveiled a plan to foster economic integration between the Republic of China-controlled offshore island of Kinmen and the coastal PRC province of Fujian. We covered this on China Update at the time. The project is intended to showcase Fujian as an example of what awaits the Taiwanese if they accept reunification with the mainland, namely a second home for themselves and their families and preferential treatment for their businesses. As the election draws nearer, we will likely see China working to exacerbate Taiwan's internal political divisions by portraying the DPP as incompetent. We can also expect China to increase its rhetoric on the risk of war if the DPP wins a third consecutive term. China would like to see the KMT win. However, a victory by lie, but without a DPP legislative majority, could also play into Beijing's hands. With a divided Taiwanese government, the CCP could try to carry out both overt and covert operations aimed at destabilizing the country while damaging the credibility of the DPP and Taiwanese democracy." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I'll see you all tomorrow.